For the past 20 years, that exponential growth curve has been the opening slide for most presentations about technology and most presentations about the future. But it's actually hugely misleading because it's led people to think that the future is driven solely by one thing. The future is driven solely by the increasing capability of technology, computing power doing everything. That's not surprising, right? You know, every September, this happened last week, Tim Cook or Steve Jobs beforehand would stand on a stage in San Francisco and immediately make the phone in your pocket rubbish. Because every year they get twice as good, right? Now, as far as I'm concerned, this, which is last year's model, was a miracle device a year ago. It is now trash, clearly. Clearly, right? And so it becomes this overwhelming thing that we live in the shadow of Moore's law, but actually we don't. We live in a world of an interdependent co-arising of change. That technology drives change, but so does culture and society and ecology and health and politics. And all of these things are interconnected. So when we think about the future, we tend to think about it poorly, and we tend to give it only one reason for change, which is the increase in technology. It's a very, very American thing to do so. Well, the most important thing, I think, to think about the future, as I said, your job really, is to have a very clear-eyed situational awareness of today. To actually think very clearly about where you are today, what the world is actually like today. I do a lot of work inside corporations and around innovation. And probably the opening exercise that we do with senior management in organizations is to find out what year it is inside their company. This is not an obvious question. If you have a company or a CEO or a board who want to take their organization through into 2030, starting from today, if they're starting in 2023, that's cool. It's a much easier job. But most organizations don't start in the present day. Most organizations have fax machines, or their CEOs have their emails printed out for them. They have processes which have not changed at all since the early 90s or even before. And so there's the general feeling in many organizations is that although they are, as far as their watch is concerned in 2023, organizationally, their chronotype is around about 2005. And taking a company from 2005 to 2030 is a much bigger leap than taking them from 2023 to 2030. And it's a huge and impossible leap if they don't know that. They don't have the situational awareness to understand exactly what time it is inside their building. And the same is true for communities and countries and other larger organizations. When we talk about AI, we make a fundamental mistake in the discourse, in that we confuse doing something that only an intelligent person can do with this machine is the same as an intelligent person. This is exactly the mistake the European Parliament made this week. The European Parliament looked at ChatGPT and all the other large language models and the other AI models that are out there, which are miraculous in their capabilities, and said that is something that only a super intelligent person can do. Therefore, that is a super intelligent person. In fact, it's more than a super intelligent person, because a super intelligent person couldn't do those things as quickly as these large language models can do. So it's a hyper-intelligent person. And what do we know about hyper-intelligent people? Well, hyper-intelligent people are likely to want to take over the world. So therefore, if we're not careful, GPT-8 or whatever will want to take over the world, because it's basically a supervillain. Why is it a supervillain? Because it has a brain the size of the planet, and brains the size of the planet in our cultural background are supervillains. Brainworms. Understandable brainworms, but brainworms nonetheless. The other problem you have with AIs as well is that human reasoning is much more complex than just language, and certainly than written language. I'd like to think of an apple. I want to show that. Think of an apple, please. in your head, think of an apple. When you think of it, when you thought of that apple, look at this slide and choose 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't say it out loud. Choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is closest to the apple that you were thinking about when you thought about it. When you thought of an apple, did you think of a photographically perfect picture of an apple in your head? You choose number 1. A slightly abstracted one, even more abstracted one, through to you didn't see a picture of an apple in your head at all. Now, this is actually a really interesting experiment that was never done before the internet, because we never had the ability to ask millions of people the same question. Because it turns out that there's a whole class of things that when you ask millions of people, you find lots of outliers. If you said number 1, when I asked you to think of an apple, you saw a photographically perfect picture of an apple in your head, you're about 60% of the population. If, however, when I asked you to think of an apple, you didn't see a picture of an apple in your head, you chose number 5, you're about 10% of the population. Before we did this experiment en masse, nobody in the number 1 category had any idea that the people in number 5 category existed. And nobody in number 5 had any idea that people in number 1 existed. Cue mass confusion. People in number 5, people who don't see a picture of an apple in their head, statistically speaking, there's going to be some people like that in the room right now, spend a lot of their time going, you see pictures in your head? And all the people in category number 1 went, you don't see pictures in your head? Human cognition is really weird, even amongst humans. How do we approach the future? How do we think about it? Well, there's this personal practice I like to teach, and this is how I'm going to leave you. It sounds weird, but when you do it, you'll actually find it's very, very helpful. It's called constant legacy-free reinvention. And it's a thing that you do, like I say, as a personal practice. You can start it tomorrow morning. It's very easy. All you do is from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, pay attention to every physical action or thought that you have. And when you do that, and you find yourself taking a physical action, brushing your teeth, writing an email, driving the car, whatever it is, ask yourself 2 questions. The first question is, what problem am I solving by doing this? I'm brushing my teeth because something died in my mouth last night. I'm sending this email because somebody has failed to do something. As per my last email, whatever it is. Once you've worked out the problem you're solving by doing that thing or having that thought, ask yourself the second question. The second question is this. If I had to do this, if I had to solve this problem today for the very first time, and I had to do it using modern tools and modern thinking, how would I solve this problem? If I had to do this for the very first time, how would I do it? What you'll find is that a good proportion of the stuff you do, you're not actually doing for a reason. And the innovation there is instant. You just stop doing it. Brilliant. There are some things you're doing, and you're doing it for a very good reason, and the way you're doing it is exactly the way you should be doing it. And that's great as well. That gives you a whole list of things you never need to worry about. But there'll be a very large amount of things that you're doing for a good reason, but you're doing it in a way which is now no longer suitable for purpose in the modern context. You're solving the problem in a way that you were taught by somebody who themselves were taught by somebody who lived in the past at some point. And you're solving that problem, whether it's a business problem or an organizational thing or some sort of any form of process within your family or community or organization, you're doing it in a way which is no longer resonant with the current context. And then all you have to do is just do a bit of Googling and find the best way of doing it today. If you do that on a personal basis for each of these individual things, what you find is very quickly you pull yourself right up to the cutting edge of today. The organizational time that you're living in, the chronotype of your organization, as I referred to earlier, will be today, which is great, because then you can just head into the future one day at a time. And thinking about tomorrow is much easier than thinking about next decade. we face an awful lot of problems and challenges over the next decade. And a lot of the ones I've shown you just now are going to get worse. And so we need people who can lead their organizations and lead their communities into that world with a clear understanding of both where they are today and where they're going to go.